as he said, this is a little awkward to stand behind the podium, and I don't want my other half of the room to feel left out, so I'm going to stand in the middle. So, I am going to talk about one aspect of the innovation system, which is towards the tail end. You heard the innovation in the front end, but what good is an innovative product if we can't get it in the hands of consumers? And at least for us in the US, it is important to get it through the FDA review process. So I'm going to show you some evidence that we have generated in support of demonstrating that the on-nicotine pouches, the pouches that we at Altria have developed, present a unique harm reduction opportunity. And unique in the sense that you hear a lot about innovations in e-cigarettes, in heat-not-burn tobacco products, but these present an option that, and the results that I'll show you demonstrate that smokers are interested and are willing to switch to these products. So let's jump right into it. I'm going to give you a little bit of a background and show you the landscape of modern oral tobacco products, talk a little bit about on, and then share with you the scientific evidence that we have generated to demonstrate the harm reduction opportunity, and end with some concluding remarks. So, let me get a raise of hands. How many people in this room are in this audience because they're interested in innovative nicotine products to address the biggest problem in the world, which is smoking? Right? And that's what that's the problem we're here to solve. Now, at least in the US, despite the knowledge that smoking is harmful and causes all these major diseases, there are 31 million adults in the US that smoke. And this number is even more staggering in the rest of the world. You have numbers like close to 1 billion smokers in the world. And, how do we solve this problem? Of course, the traditional strategy of decreasing initiation and increasing cessation has worked, but it hasn't worked fast enough. And that's where harm reduction comes into play, right? So switching smokers to alternative products will accelerate and will help us address the problem. And this tobacco harm reduction framework is based on the scientific evidence. There's overwhelming scientific evidence that has shown that combustible cigarettes are at one end, and smoke-free products like heat-not-burn, e-cigarettes, or tobacco products are on the bottom of the cliff. Now, this risk continuum has been broadly accepted by many in public health as well as the regulators, but that's often shown as a continuum. But we believe at Altria that there is actually a discontinuum. And what I mean by that is there's a clear separation between combustible products and non-combustible products. And that has been the basis for our vision, which is to transition adult smokers to a smoke-free future. Now, we know that, one size does not fit all, right? We have to give smokers a variety of options. And at Altria, we have a range of oral and inhalable tobacco products. And I'm going to focus on the modern oral tobacco products. Now, at least this is the landscape in the US. What you're seeing on the far right-hand panel are pouch products that contain synthetic nicotine. Now, there are a range of products in the US market, but of course, that loophole has been closed by FDA, and a number of these products are going to get off the market unless they submit a PMTA and the scientific evidence to support continuing marketing. But on the left-hand side are the traditional oral tobacco-derived nicotine pouches. And note that they come in a range of flavors and nicotine strengths. And not only that, there are other types of oral tobacco products, including gums, lozenges, and even sticks that are available in the US market. Now, this category has been growing rapidly. And just let me draw your attention to the first panel, where you can see that, as a percent of your oral tobacco product in the US, there's been a 7.5 percentage point growth within a year. So they account for about 18% of the oral tobacco products in the US. And where is that coming from? A lot of the growth is driven by ZYN and on. Zyn accounting for about 47%, and on, right on the heels, about 40%. And the remaining 15% are from other products. So 85% is from Zyn and on. Now, on, it's a tobacco leaf-free product and comes in 7 different flavors and 5 nicotine strains. So there is something in it for everybody. So that range, we really believe that having a range of different types of products is going to be important to give smokers to find the product that fits their needs. And when we prepared for this submission to FDA, we did this in a 9-month time frame, so that's part of the innovation that we brought to the table. And that was based on a scientific framework which is grounded on the regulatory framework that's established in the US by FDA, but also based on sound scientific principles that public health and others have proposed for demonstrating harm reduction. And the 3 pillars that we have for harm reduction is constituent reduction, individual risk reduction, and population harm reduction. Now, there are a number of non-clinical and human studies that form the basis of each of these categories. And for the time limitation, I'm going to just present to you some key lines of evidence. The first thing is, of course, the constituent reduction. And what you're seeing here on the graph is the % reduction relative to a reference cigarette. And no surprise, right? Because these products are non-combustible and have no tobacco on it, many of the HPHCs, the harmful and potentially harmful constituents, are just not there. The TSNAs, the benzoyl-parine, the other carcinogens, arsenic, cadmium, they can't even detect them. And the carbonyls are reduced like 99%. There's very trace levels of those carbonyls. Not only that compared to cigarettes, but now if you compare to snus, which is a product that's used in a similar manner, and actually general snus, as you all know, in the US, FDA authorizes an MRTP. If you compare to that, similar results. None of the tobacco-related constituents can be seen, and the other constituents are largely reduced. So now we have evidence that the levels of the bad stuff is just disappeared. And of course, if you have a smoker who switches from cigarettes to these products, will have lower exposure. And this reduction in exposure should lead to reduction in disease risk. Now, these products have not been in the market long enough to generate epidemiological evidence, so we rely on the epidemiology from smokeless, including snus, to demonstrate that the reduction in exposure, if it's sustained for a long enough time period, will result in reduction in disease risk. So what you're seeing here is the first bar is the relative risk for many of the smoking-related diseases, and then the second bar is for smokeless tobacco, and the dotted line is never tobacco use. And no surprise that a lot of the smoking-related diseases are substantially reduced in consumption of smokeless tobacco products, including snus. And not only that, if you compare that to cigarette smoke, or compare that to never tobacco use, they're marginally higher than never tobacco use. And because on does not have any tobacco in it, we expect that the reductions in disease are at minimum going to be the same level as smokeless tobacco. Now, there were some questions about the pharmacokinetics. Well, we generated the data for our products. And what you're seeing here is the nicotine PK profile for the on products with remember I told you there are 5 nicotine levels. And the release of nicotine reflects the amount of nicotine in these products. What this illustrates is that based on, remember I told you that smokers are not a monolithic group, so there is different needs from different smokers, and what we find is that people will find the product that fits their needs. So I've shown you, HPHCs are reduced, exposure should be reduced, disease risk should be reduced. Now let's see whether people are actually interested in using these products, and this chart actually shows data from a large survey that we did to determine intentions to use. So this is, the y-axis is likelihood of using a product. And what we see across the board that, sorry, this is a bit sensitive. Across the board, you see that moderate to high proportion of adult tobacco users express an interest to use the product. Now, that's just intend to use. Do actually people use it? This was a study that we did amongst adult smokers and adult smokeless tobacco users. So a large study, 1,000 participants were given the option to choose between the range of tobacco of on! products at the different flavor levels and nicotine levels. And we found that within 6 weeks, 28% of adult smokers, mind you, these were smokers that were not interested in quitting in the next 30 days, 28% switched completely to the on! Nicotine pouches. And the important thing was that the flavor and nicotine levels played a role in helping them find the right product that meets the need. Similarly, smokeless tobacco users represented as dippers in this case. 3/4 of the dippers switched completely to on! And not only that, amongst adult smokers, 40% of them reduced their cigarette consumption by 50% or more. Now, that's remarkable. In 6 weeks, adult smokers not interested in quitting either switch completely or substantially reduce their cigarette consumption. And we know from the scientific evidence that reduction in cigarette consumption does pose some benefit, but also demonstrates their transition to complete switching. Now, in the same study, we tried to get some sense of what's their reason for using on! In the future. And what we find is that a significant proportion say that they would like to use it for either to help or cut back smoking. Half of them said that for harm reduction reasons. A proportion said that they like the flavors, they enjoy the taste, and the range of nicotine levels also played an important role in their consideration of continuing to use these products. This is really, really important. If we are going to be successful in getting harm reduction, I think having the range of nicotine levels and flavors is critical. Now, so I showed you intentions, and then in this study, of course, this was an experimental setting where they were getting the product for free. So we wanted to determine what's happening in the real world, because the study, which was a 6-week study that was near real world, well, not exactly real world. So this is data from purchase behavior. And what we find is that 65% of the on! Users were smokers. And that very much aligns with our vision, which is to transition smokers to a smoke-free future. Now, on the other hand, ZYN, only 40% were smokers. They were mainly coming from smokeless tobacco. So that's a big difference. So, not only people express an interest to use, in a study setting, they use and switch, and in real world, they're putting their money down to purchase on! So that's where the promise is. Now, of course, we can't just look at users. We have to demonstrate that there is no unintended consequences amongst non-users. And for the interest of time, I'm just going to summarize here that, amongst non-users, we see low likelihood of appeal, and they do understand that this is risk-free, and non-users are not very interested in using. And more importantly, the likelihood of use among youth is very low. And that brings me towards the end, which is, when we integrate all of this evidence, the HPHC, the switching behavior, and the fact that they reduce the cigarette consumption, and all the behavioral studies that demonstrate that, they understand these products are not risk-free and has low abuse potential or comparable to that of a cigarette, all that integration led us to conclude that these products are appropriate for the protection of public health, the bar that FDA has set for authorizing a new product. Now, that in itself is not sufficient. We understand that there are misperceptions, the widely prevailing nicotine misperceptions, so it's important to communicate to the smokers so they can understand the difference, and we are working towards developing a modified risk tobacco product application. Because in the US, we can't say anything to the consumer about the benefit of switching. We can only do that through an FDA-authorized claim. So in order to overcome the barriers, we have developed a comprehensive set of studies to find the right language that resonates with the consumers, with adult smokers, and we're in the process of developing a modified risk tobacco product application, which we'll be submitting in the near future. And in closing, I just want to say that as we think about advancing harm reduction, it's important to have choices available, at least for the US, FDA-authorized products available for them to choose from. And we need to make sure that they understand that they get accurate, not misleading information so they can make informed decisions. And that has to be consistently delivered through all the sources. We as manufacturers can do our part by doing the MRTPA, but that should come from all other sources, including other stakeholders. So I'm going to end by making a shameless plug. If you want to learn more about this, do come and visit our booth. It's right outside. And if there are any more questions, I'd be glad to receive them.
Mohamadi, thank you very much. And I can see a question over here on the right to start with.
Hi, it's John Fell here. Mohamadi, I'm pretty sure I remember you standing up on that stage about 4 or 5 years ago talking about your modified risk application for Copenhagen. What's happened to that? And practically, does the arrival of ON in your portfolio mean that's not a priority now and you're better off pursuing the MRTP for this? And then just one other question on that switching data for ON versus ZYN, showing that more of the ON switchers came from cigarettes. Do you think that's something inherent in the product, or is it more to do with differences in the channels or the way that the two products are sold?
Sure. So regarding your first question, absolutely. We are still interested in pursuing the MRTP for Copenhagen. We submitted to FDA. It is still sitting within FDA to get the authorization of the claim, and we are very optimistic. Look, in the US, there are close to 6 million smokeless tobacco users, the traditional dip users. So, we think that it's important. Now, amongst those users, 90% of them, if you remember the slides that I showed during the presentation a few years ago, 90% of them believe that smokeless tobacco is as harmful or even more harmful than cigarettes. So we think that's important. We need to correct that. And there are 6 million, half of them are dual users. And if we can get them to switch from cigarettes to smokeless, that would be a good step in the right direction. So we're absolutely committed to that. This is yet another opportunity to enhance the opportunity of harm reduction, particularly among smokers. Your second question on, why did the smokers switch? Well, I showed you the data. We have done research, and even the POT data has shown that half of the adult smokers are interested in alternative products. So they are kind of yearning for new products. And what this product does is gives them yet another option to choose from. So we're very excited about the results, and the initial results are very promising. So we hope that it will continue to be a success in the marketplace.
Can I just ask one follow-up? What really I was wondering about, because you showed that I think 60% of the ON volumes came from, 65 from smokers,
yeah.
And it was 40% for ZYN.
Right.
So I'm wondering, is that something intrinsic to differences in the product, or do you think you've found a way of marketing, explaining the ON product to consumers in a way which convinces more people to switch?
Right. I can't speak about ZYN, but for us, because that's our vision, which is to transition smokers, our marketing was primarily focused on smokers. And, we, in fact, specifically marketed to smokers using our database of adult smokers. And, of course, there's uniqueness about this product. It's a smaller pouch, which we found that smokers find it convenient to use as opposed to the bigger pouches. And the other promising thing was yesterday we had a session on women. In the US, 50% of smokers are women. Women also tend to like these products. So, that's yet another benefit.
Thanks very much.
Any other questions? Wave your hand vigorously and I might be able to see it.
There's one right here.
I'm glad you're watching.
Yes, thank you. Do we have comparable data say in matched subjects, comparing the acceptability of and tolerability of nicotine pouches compared to the other ATPs? And yeah, just a related question. I don't have much experience with nicotine pouches, but are there any local irritation side effects? Because it's usually placed in between the gums and the lips. So do you recommend that it be placed in other areas, not just in one area? Because users usually have a tendency just to place it on one side. So are there any problems about local irritations and some other side effects?
Right, no, that's a great question. So let me unpack that. First of all, we give instructions for use. I mean, if it's on our website and it's on the back of a package to place the products in the upper lip. Now, that said, just the general behavior of US consumers is that because of the traditional use of dip in the lower lip, when we assess in our studies where they place the product, we find that, while most of them put it in the upper lip, some put it in the lower lip. And they tend to move around, as you said. So, I think generally speaking, while, most people will keep it in the upper lip, they might keep it in the lower lip, or they'll move it around. Regarding a question about, any adverse effects, so, we've done several clinical studies over the years, and we monitor the adverse events, and there are no unexpected adverse events. You see the typical adverse events that you see in a clinical study, headache, et cetera, but nothing unique about, oral effects. That said, we understand that this may be a question that will need to be addressed. So we're actually doing a study to systematically evaluate the oral health effects from using these nicotine pouches.
But how about the acceptability compared to the other ATPs? I mean, the preferences of smokers who are switched to these products?
It's generally, acceptable. It's, look, we all recognize that, oral products will have to work harder if somebody is used to smoking. There's, a huge behavioral component in, the smoking behavior. And absent that, you have kind of a passive, very stagnant product, and you don't have much hand-to-mouth movement. So, I guess that's the cue. But so it will take some time for smokers to adjust to it, which is why when we saw that, 30% switched, but, the 40% reduced their cigarette consumption by 50% or more. So that in itself is evidence that, smokers find these products acceptable. And one of the things that we observed was that the availability of the range of flavors and nicotine levels does help them identify. So in those group that switched completely, we found that, they used 1 to 2 different flavors. So over 6 weeks, kind of they gravitated to their preference and used different nicotine levels. So it's generally, well accepted and well tolerated. I mean, we have not seen any evidence of any localized gum bleeding or oral health effects in our studies.
Thank you.
Hi, William Vargas from the Philippines. In terms of regulation, do you follow, for example, marketing and public cues, do you follow the federal regulations applicable to conventional cigarettes, or because the product is discrete, you don't have to worry about what rules would apply?
Well, we have a new sheriff in town in the US, and we don't want to bend any rules or, get out of line. So there are, for all nicotine pouches, FDA has mandated that there's 30% of the packaging is covered with the labeling that this product contains nicotine, and nicotine is an addictive chemical. So that's there. In terms of marketing, we have some best marketing practices to limit exposure to youth. So, through the channels, we make sure that we verify the age. Before it was 18, now, with the advent of the raising the minimum age to 21. We have checks and balances to make sure that the store clerks adequately do all the due diligence to make sure that they don't sell to youth. So, we have very, very strong guardrails around following the best practices. That's something that, we do as a principle, regardless of whether it's cigarette or oral product.
Hi, Mohamadi. Mark McQuillan. Mohamadi, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe your product and Zyn as well, which you referenced, are both dry products. I'm just interested in your research, if you came across any differences in terms of people's perceptions towards, let's say, moist white products versus dry white products. For example, in Europe here we see quite a large uptake of moist products. US tends to be more dry to a certain extent, and whether that's a different demographic or user group as well.
Yeah, I don't think that there are any wet pouches in the US marketplace, so the smokers don't know any difference. I mean, I can speak from the evidence that we collected. It seems that, smokers don't necessarily notice that it's a dry pouch. I mean, it seems to work quite well and, delivers the nicotine that is satisfying enough for them to make the switch. It remains to be seen whether there is any difference. I don't know if there are folks from Sweden, whether they may want to comment on that. But I don't think that people, at least the adult smokers that we have seen in the US marketplace, necessarily are seeking a wet pouch.
Okay. Perhaps time for one more? Or not? Okay. People must be looking forward to a coffee. Thank you very much, Mohamadi, for taking the questions there.